Hi there, welcome to Rent Prep for Landlords. I'm Andrew Schultz, Community Manager here at Rent Prep. I'm also a licensed real estate broker with over 14 years of experience in the rental property and property management industries, and I own a property management company. Today we're going to be taking a look at 5 red flags that you should be aware of, things that you may encounter while dealing with a property manager. Let's get to it. So you have a property manager, you've been working with them for a few months, things have been going really well, and then all of a sudden something happens and things start to change. Maybe it's your emails. They're not getting returned quite as quickly as what you're used to. Maybe you have to leave multiple messages over the phone before someone gives you a call back. It could be something, or it could be the sign of a deeper problem. Today we're going to take a look at 5 different red flag scenarios that you may encounter when dealing with a property manager, as well as look at some possible solutions. Everything doesn't necessarily need to result in replacing your property manager, but let's go ahead and jump into our first scenario here, which is when communication gets slow or stops altogether. There are a couple of different things that could be happening in a situation like this. You may find yourself sending that email or leaving a voicemail and not getting that response back as quickly as what you were thinking. And this could very well be a red flag, but it's not always a red flag. Let me explain a little bit further here. Property managers are people too. We have busy days and we have light days, and we have sick days and we have vacation days. Just because your property manager is not responding to you right away may just mean that they're tending to another client. Maybe there's an emergency at another property that they're dealing with and they simply can't get back to you right away. It could also be a situation where they're out of the office, maybe they're sick, maybe they're on vacation, and they forgot to set an autoresponder. There are scenarios out there where, yes, your property manager is still there, yes, they are still being attentive, they just happen to be incredibly busy at the moment. And yes, that is something that legitimately does happen in property management from time to time. But what it really boils down to is this a temporary thing, or is this a situation where they're just plain out not communicating with you at all anymore? My recommendation in this situation is not to panic and make sure you're giving enough time for your property manager to get back to you. If you're not getting a response within 24, maybe 48 hours on the long end for a non-emergency type issue, at that point, I would say it's probably fair to ping them again and follow up. You may even want to step it up a level. So if you sent an email the first time, you didn't get a response, maybe now you call the office and say, hey, I'm looking for a response to my email. Maybe if you called the first time, you call and leave a voicemail and then send a text message or something along those lines. It's basically just moving up one level of communication from whatever you were working on or whatever you had done previously. And again, if this is something that happens to you once or twice where it takes a minute for your property manager to get back to you, I probably wouldn't make that big of a deal out of it. But if it's something that's happening more and more, it's something to start getting concerned about. And the reason for that is if your emails are going unanswered, does that also mean that other people's emails are going unanswered? What about potential tenants that are trying to rent your apartment? Can they reach your property manager in order to even secure a showing and get in to take a look at the place? So essentially, it's going to have an impact on your property if it's something that's happening a lot. So it's definitely something to be cognizant of. So if you're reaching out to your property manager and they're not getting back to you, that's definitely something that you need to dig into a little bit deeper. The bottom line is communication with your property manager is critical. If you're having difficulty in communicating with your property manager, have a conversation with them and try to outline some expectations as to how frequently you need to communicate with them and how frequently you need them to communicate back. Also keep in mind that you could be over-communicating with your property manager. Property managers are a professional entity. They know how to manage your property. At least they should. You're entrusting them to manage your asset, so hopefully you've picked one that knows what they're doing. If you're constantly sending them little emails about don't forgets and what ifs and things of that nature, essentially trying to micromanage their operation from wherever you happen to be, chances are you're going to wind up bumping down the priority list for that property manager. Property managers have policies and procedures for a reason. Let them run their policies and procedures. Our second red flag is going to be finding out that your property manager isn't licensed after you've started working with them. This is one that you can generally avoid by doing your due diligence on the front end and understanding what the laws are in your state. Many states now require there to be some sort of license for someone doing property management, whether it be a real estate license or some other form of license. And here in New York State, you have to be a licensed real estate broker, or you have to be a licensed real estate agent working under a broker that knows that you're conducting property management operations. That's critical. If your broker doesn't know that you're doing property management, you're just as just as out there as not having any licensure at all. So make sure that your broker understands if you're an agent and you're doing property management. In most states, there's going to be a database online where you'll be able to pull information on whether or not someone has a license. In some states, it'll actually tell you if there are any disciplinary issues tied to that license, when it's active until, when it expires, if they have any special certifications, sometimes that might show up. But in pretty much every state where licensure is required, there's going to be some way for you to check to see if the person that you're working with is licensed. This is one of those things that you're going to want to check out during the due diligence phase of your property management. But there are some circumstances where someone could be licensed at the onset of your property management agreement and then either lose their license or allow a license to lapse or something along those lines. The simple fact is, if you're in a state that requires licensure for property management and you're working with an unlicensed property manager, you run the risk of your property manager basically being shut down at any time. And it's pretty obvious that if they're not real keen on following the laws when it comes to simple things like licensure, how keen are they going to be on following the law when it comes to much more important things like fair housing and eviction laws and things of that nature? This one, for me, boils down to simple integrity, basically is what it boils down to. If you lie about having a license, or if your license winds up being revoked, or it expires and you're continuing to do business without having a license, I've got no use for you. Simply put, I have no use for someone that can't play within the rules of the industry that we operate in. If you find yourself in a situation where your property manager isn't licensed and it's a requirement in your area, I would say that this is one of those situations where you should be looking to terminate that property management agreement and you should be looking for a new property manager. At the end of the day, you have to protect your asset and you have to protect your tenants. And having someone on your team who isn't complying with basic laws such as licensure is just setting yourself up for failure. Now, if you're in a state that doesn't require licensure, there are a couple of different trade groups out there that many property managers join that offer both education and certification. Just being affiliated with one of these trade groups does not necessarily mean that that property manager knows what they're doing or is a good property manager, but it does at least go to show that they're more than likely getting some continuing education and staying current on what's happening in the industry across the country, not just what's happening within the four walls of their property management office. The two organizations that are most widely recognized currently are NAA, the National Apartment Association, and NARPM, N-A-R-P-M, the National Association of Residential Property Managers. And that second one, NARPM, I'm actually a member of that. That's a great organization. Lots of really good training, lots of really good opportunities, and they put on some great conferences to help property managers stay educated and stay current in the industry. Our third red flag is when your property management company grows too large, too fast. It's not uncommon for property management companies to jump from around 50 doors to well over 100 doors very, very quickly. The problem is many small property management companies simply don't have the systems in place to be able to scale that quickly, and a lot of times they also lack the staff to scale that quickly. In many instances, this is going to result in a lack of communication, like we talked about in the first video, either between you and the property management company or between the tenant and the property management company. And keep in mind, your tenants have to deal with this company every single time there's an issue with the property. So it can become very, very confusing or very, very challenging for your tenants quickly, ultimately becoming annoying and resulting in a vacancy. Now, this can be a little bit harder for you to determine. But generally, you're going to start to notice things that are slipping that weren't necessarily slipping before. A grass cut gets missed. A tenant starts to pay rent late and the property management company doesn't get a late rent notice out right away. A tenant moves out and it takes forever to get a turnover quote because the property manager is just too busy to get one over to you. These are all essentially process type items that get put in place over time as a company grows. And essentially, if a property management company doesn't have these systems in place, it's going to leave them open to error. Essentially, if a property management company has 50 lawns, it's very, very easy for one lawn out of 50 to get overlooked. But if that property management company has a system in place whereby every time they bring a new property on, it automatically adds that property to the lawn cut list, suddenly that's a process and a procedure, and suddenly you're not dropping the ball on those lawn cuts anymore. If your property management company doesn't have a good set of procedures in place, it leaves them open and prone to errors, just like that one. No matter what, eventually that company is going to get too big for one person or two people to remember everything that's going on in their heads. But I can tell you a lot of times this is one of those things that most smaller property management companies won't even realize is a problem until it slaps them in the face. Rapid growth can be great. It can be an amazing thing as long as you have the parts and pieces in place to make everything run the way that it's supposed to when you achieve that massive growth. But rapid growth can also be very, very destructive when you're just trying to spin things up and you don't have all those parts and pieces in place yet. Our next red flag is getting your monthly statement from your property management company and seeing a charge on there that you don't recognize or didn't authorize. Every property management company is going to have a little bit different process for how they handle their billing, but if you see something on your monthly statement that doesn't make sense, at that point it's probably time to ask your property management company, why is this charge on here and what is this for? The first thing that I would recommend would be to check your property management agreement thoroughly, and really, this is something that you probably should do before you sign your property management agreement, but I digress. Double check your property management agreement thoroughly and make sure that you didn't already agree to this fee or this charge and you just didn't realize it. You inadvertently signed off on something that perhaps you shouldn't have, or perhaps you would have tried to negotiate it if you had noticed it, whatever the case may be, but you've signed off on your property management agreement and that extra charge or that extra fee was already in there and you simply didn't notice it. Stuff like that happens all the time. That's why we strongly recommend that people read through their property management agreement top to bottom, left to right, before they sign it so that they completely understand all the charges that are possible when it comes to property management. So for instance, maybe you were charged for a trip to the property that you don't think that you should have been charged for. There might be something in your property management agreement that says we're going to make X number of trips to your property, which is included in the property management agreement. But once we get to a certain number of trips, we have to start billing you at $Y for every trip that we take out to the property. That's something that generally speaking would be outlined in your management agreement in some way, shape, or form. Another good example is having a pre-authorized maintenance limit. Perhaps your management agreement allows your property manager to spend up to $500 on maintenance items without consulting you first. Well, is that $500 per unit? Is that $500 per property? $500 for the entire portfolio? $500 for the month? $500 per expense? There's a lot of different ways that you can look at $500 when you're talking about a maintenance limit. And that's why you really need to understand what's in your property management agreement so you understand what are they allowed to spend without coming back to ask me questions. Fortunately, as I just mentioned, this is something that should definitely be in your management agreement. If you don't have some sort of a pre-authorization in your property management agreement for maintenance, you should probably work on that with your property manager. I would legitimately be shocked if a manager is signing an agreement where they have to come back and ask you every single time they need to change a light bulb. Simply put, it's not time or cost effective for us to contact you every single time you need to change a lock or something of that nature. But by the same token, you also need to make sure that your property manager is not abusing that and spending more than what they really should be spending, because that's going to have an impact on your cash flow. So before you put your property management company on blast for a charge that you don't understand, double check to make sure that they weren't actually already correct and already authorized in billing that. And then if you still don't understand the charge or you don't think that it's right, talk to your property manager. Your property manager should be able to explain and justify every single charge that's on a monthly statement. And if they can't, at that point, maybe it warrants digging into a little bit further. If it's something that's happening quite a bit where you're getting multiple months where there are a lot of unexpected charges, maybe it's time to start shopping for another property manager at that point. And onto our last and final red flag, and we definitely saved the best for last, missing reports or missing rent deposits. This is probably one of the biggest red flags that there is, and generally speaking, by the time you get to this stage, there have already been other red flags that you have missed or were ignored or whatever the case may be. When a property management company gets to the point where they're missing reports or they're not getting rent funds out to you in a timely fashion, it's the beginning of the end for that property management company in pretty much every instance. I don't think I've ever seen a property management company come back from something like that. Keep in mind that as a licensed real estate broker here in the state of New York and conducting property management operations, I have a fiduciary responsibility to every client that I work with. Now, I'm not going to sit and get into the weeds on what a fiduciary responsibility is and how it all works, but essentially what it boils down to is I need to be working in the best interest of my client at all times, including financially. I can't be looking out for my own best interests, my company's best interests, the tenant's best interests. My fiduciary responsibility is to my client. So if I'm failing to get reports out in a timely fashion, or if I fail to make a deposit into one of my clients' bank accounts, I'm in violation of my fiduciary responsibilities. Here at Own Buffalo, along with honestly most other property management companies and real estate brokers, we take that responsibility very, very seriously. Our lives and our businesses and our licenses and your assets depend on it. But there are some people that get into this industry that don't take that responsibility nearly as seriously. Once you get to this stage, my recommendation is to start shopping for a new property management company immediately. Understand that this is probably going to wind up being a messy situation for you. There's really no other way around it. You're going to find out that more than likely you have some missing rents. You might be missing some security deposits. You may have vacancies where you thought that you had tenants. You may have tenants where you thought that you had vacancies. Every single one of those is a legitimate, real scenario that I've encountered in my time in this industry, in taking on new clients and talking to people that have had bad experience with property managers. Every single one of those is an experience, is a story that someone has told to me over the phone about a property management company that fell apart and left the property owner trying to pick up the pieces. If you're in a state that does require licensure, you can file a complaint with whatever the state agency is that issues the real estate licenses. Here in New York, it's Department of State. You can also file complaints with the local board of realtors if that brokerage happens to be a member of the local board of realtors. New York State seems to be taking state-level complaints at least a little bit more seriously now than they have in years past, especially about property management, because we've had so many issues with bad managers or fly-by-night operations and things of that nature. The local board of realtors has an ethics committee that will hear cases, typically agent-to-agent type cases, but they may be able or willing to mediate in a situation such as this one as well. Unfortunately, they only deal with licensed brokers, whether it be the state licensing agency or the department, the board of realtors in your area. Both of them are only going to deal with licensed entities. If you're dealing with an unlicensed property manager, you're essentially going to have to try to get that person or that company into court. That's a whole process in and of itself. I'm not going to jump into all the ins and outs of how to make that happen, but you might want to consider speaking with your state attorney general's office, or perhaps your state has like a consumer protections bureau, something along those lines. They may be able to steer you in the right direction if you're already in a situation such as this, but really the goal obviously is to avoid situations like this altogether. So there you have it. Working with a property manager can be the gas on the fire that takes your portfolio to the next level. It could also be the seized brakes on the bicycle, stopping your portfolio from going down the road. Have you ever had a bad experience with a property manager that you'd like to tell us about? Drop it in the comments down below, and you may be featured in one of our upcoming videos. With all that said, we're going to get out of here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Andrew Schultz with RentPrep.com, and we'll talk to you soon.